Well, we've got Cody here with us now. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great today. Now, you've got a new book which is out on Kindle at the moment called Casualty. So, can you just describe the basic plot and premise of that book for us, first of all?
Well, the book is based off of actual events.
Mm,
The first half of the book is all pretty much things that I regrettably did when I was younger. I was
yeah.
addicted to crystal meth from the time I was 15 until I was 21.
Mm,
And then the second part of the book is kind of a story that I tell to just be an interesting story. It's a little bit of
yeah.
both.
Yeah. And do you find writing about real events easier than the fiction stuff, or is the fiction stuff easier, or is it kind of equal?
I actually found the real things to be a lot easier to write about. The first
Mm.
part of the book took about 3 months to get down on paper, and then the second part of the book, it's 400 pages long, and then
Wow.
the second part of the book took the better part of 3 years to get down on paper. Because I wanted
Wow.
to tell a cohesive story.
Yeah. And even though it's easier overall, the true stuff, because it's about your own addictions, is that still quite hard to kind of go back to and think about a lot?
A lot of this stuff is kind of hard to think about and go
Mm.
back to, particularly because of the emotions that it brings up.
Yeah.
I caused a lot of pain to a lot of people and a lot of grief to my family. I was a teenager when I was doing a lot of these things, and they were the
Yeah.
ones who really had to deal with the brunt of the consequences. I served the jail time, but they're the ones who really were emotionally damaged by the things I was doing. So that was a little hard to dig up and to
Yeah.
remember, the way I'd made them feel back then. But it was kind of cathartic, actually, to be honest with you,
Mm.
to do that.
Yeah, and I suppose in a way, writing books which, if somebody hasn't heard you talking just now, might just assume the whole thing is fiction, you can get away with talking about things because people might not realize it's your own experience, if you get
Mhm.
what I mean. Like, it's
I
sort
do.
of still anonymous, even though you're writing it.
And that's why I changed the names of the characters in the book. Like
Yeah.
I'm portrayed by a character named Jimmy.
Mm.
There are other characters in the book that are relatively based on real people, particularly the parents. And
Yeah.
it was even if the people out there don't know that it's most of this stuff is true, it
Yeah.
still feels good to know that it was heard, in the hopes of somebody who's also going through this will read it and say, wow, there is somebody out there who feels like I feel right now, and who
Yeah.
themselves feels heard because of reading what I wrote.
Mm. And what made you want to do it half and half, real and fiction, rather than just doing all of it your real life story?
Well, I it was you say I had originally started writing the book as like
Mm.
a story of like the story of my life and everything
Yeah.
like that. And the story of my life is just so much longer than I could put into a book. We're talking about a
Yeah.
period of over 6 years here.
Mm.
And so, without giving away too much of the book, it was a way to, and because being addicted for 6 years, you go through periods of, man, I should really quit, man, I don't want
Yeah.
to quit, and going back and forth and stuff. So it was just a way to kind of condense all that down,
Mm.
and also tell an interesting story that was
Yeah.
inspired by one of my friends who was in the military, and really gave up his life to serve this country. So,
Yeah.
um, you know.
And I guess, do you find that having some parts of it that are fictional, that sort of helps it become a little bit more interesting if you've got an idea that didn't happen in real life, but you think would be good to include anyway?
Yeah, and that's why I avoided, putting based on a true story on the cover,
Yeah.
or putting something like that on the true cover, because all in all, I wanted to tell a good story
Mm.
that I felt would help somebody out there, be an inspirational story as well as a cautionary story to
Yeah.
people, without saying, hey, look, this is what you're in for if you don't stop. It's just a way to make people think, and again, make them feel like they're not alone in this world. And there is somebody out there who at least has experienced some of the things that they're going through right now.
Yeah, and I guess to be honest, most things that say they're based on a true story, it's like, yeah, not really. So
Yeah.
this is probably more true than a lot of things that claim to be true.
And that's in the second part of the description. I put it's inspired by actual events. I didn't want to say
Yeah,
it's based on a true story. You know what I mean? Because
yeah,
while there are elements of the story, like the whole first part of the book, is a true story.
mm,
But the second part of the book isn't. So I called it, this is a combination of true events as well as a good story to make
yeah.
a good story for people to hear.
And I think it's quite surprising how much of real life stuff can be used to inspire a book. Because sometimes I'll go and see a film and think, this is a bit far fetched, and then look it up after the film, and it turns out this story actually happened in real life.
Yeah.
So there's so much that is based on real life events that we don't even realise, I suppose, and much more is possible than we think.
Absolutely, and all the comedians say that the greatest comedy comes from real life, the
Oh yeah.
greatest drama comes from real life, everything like that. It's like the movie Titanic. It
Yeah.
was the story of Jack and Rose. It was based on the backdrop of true events, and that made the story all that more interesting and all that
Yeah.
more involved, and
Yeah.
gave people somebody to be connected to in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree about the comedy's funny when it's not intentional because people can spend hours crafting a joke and it still doesn't make you laugh as much as a guy falling off a chair.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'd rather watch a fail video on YouTube rather than watch just some dude do stand-up comedy that he
Yeah.
just made up.
For sure. And why particularly is the book called Casualty? Does medicalness become a major factor in the plot at all?
Yeah. There's actually quite a few casualties in the book.
Mm.
Casualty in America, I don't know how it is over in Britain, but in America, casualty is used to describe a wide variety of people, whether they
Yeah.
are injured by something, whether they're killed by something.
Yeah.
Disabled veterans are casualties of war. People who don't
Mm.
survive an addiction are casualties of the drug war. And there's quite a bit of sadness in this book that was difficult to write. And Casualty describes the vast majority of the characters in this book.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's pretty much the same here. I think the word is slightly used less often. I kind of associate it with casualty as in the place you go to if you're involved in a serious injury. But I guess we would
Oh,
say 5,000 casualties or something in an
yeah.
attack, I suppose.
Yeah. If somebody loses a leg, that's a
Yeah.
casualty of the attacker.
Yeah. So is this the first book you've ever written or have you tried stuff before?
This is the first book I've ever written. I was in a relationship. I was engaged to a girl who was in nursing school,
Ooh.
and we both worked full time. And I was actually going to college for my bachelor's degree to get into law school.
Yeah.
And she had a son, and with our schedules so crazy, with us both going to school and both working full time, nobody was actually able to spend time with him, and he started getting lonely. So I actually quit school,
Wow.
and in between playing with him and stuff like that, I decided, oh, might as well do something else with my time when he's playing video games or something. And I just had this idea for this book, and I began writing it, and
Wow.
it finally took shape.
Mm. And did you do it all yourself, or did you have to acquire or research maybe to get a little bit of help with how to structure a book? Because I don't know, maybe you're a lot better than me, but if I tried to write a book right now, I would be so lost.
Well, I've always been a storyteller my whole life. I've always been
Yeah.
able to. That's one thing. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the strongest guy, but
Mm.
I've always been able to tell an engaging story. And I wrote the book all myself. I did a little research because one of the characters, Ryan, actually ends up going into the military, and I regrettably never served because of what I did in the book. In the first part,
Yeah.
I was precluded from joining the military, so I had to talked to some of my friends who had served. I had to do a little research on the internet to find out how to write that part of it.
Hmm.
As far as the book, I wrote it all myself, and then I hired an independent editor just to make sure, what she said, the voice and the narrative was all cohesive and it all sounded like a continuous story, make sure all my commas were correct.
Oh yeah.
And then I hired a graphic designer to do the cover of the book
Yeah.
and used small business all the way around. The editor was actually a British lady as well. And she just came in and, you know, I have to admit that British people sure do have a lot better vocabulary and sentence structuring than a lot of Americans do. The way you talk is just very beautiful and flourishing, and I really appreciated the tint that she put on the book with some of the way that she switched the sentences around and stuff like that.
Well, that's interesting, getting a British person to help with the book, because there's different spellings that you guys have for some words. So did she change them or put the British spelling in without realizing that there's an American one?
No, she actually, because there's a lot of informal language in the book, it's dealing with drug dealers in Las Vegas and stuff. So I wanted to make sure that she, if there was a better way to say something, she would text me and say, hey, I think this sentence would sound better this way.
Yeah.
And I'd either say, yeah, go ahead, or no, don't worry about it. But the spelling, she didn't really mess with. Just the sentence structure and making sure all my commas and apostrophes and stuff were correct like that.
And I guess there's no difference between America and here for that, because that would be rather odd. And on the cover, I'm not really good at identifying American cities, but it looks quite distinctly to be Las Vegas. Is that right?
Yeah. I was born in Nevada. I lived in Las Vegas for most of my life, and Las Vegas is the setting of this novel, along with Indian Springs State Penitentiary and Kandahar, Afghanistan.
Yeah, so I guess it's already established the setting without even having to open the book.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So going right back to years ago now, I suppose, what kind of led up to your addiction in the first place?
Well, I was, it's, that same old story, growing up, I was kind of different. I didn't really fit in with the athletic kids. I didn't really fit in with the theater kids. I didn't really fit in with anybody.
Yeah.
So eventually I found my niche falling in with dope fiends. But the goth kids, don't let me paint them with a bad brush. Most of them are very good people, but a lot of them do drugs. And I fell in, started smoking pot I started smoking cigarettes at 13, started smoking pot at 14. And then by 15, I was addicted as like a coping mechanism, I guess you could say, because I just really never fit in with anybody.
Yeah. And you mentioned before that you had various points where you were like, I need to quit, but I don't want to. How did you eventually quit? What kind of made you not do it anymore, I suppose?
I guess it was a preponderance of the events, as you go on, you can do one bad thing and then you can do another bad thing. And eventually people start looking at them as individual events, it starts becoming a pattern of behavior. And I was, getting to the point where I was going to be facing some very serious prison time. And the most thing, though, was I was in court one day.
Yeah.
And the judge, because in Las Vegas at that time, the whole city was very overpopulated. The jails were especially overpopulated, and they used to do what's called ORing, release you on your own recognizance, unless you've committed a serious enough offense or a series of offenses. And one time the judge, instead, I had gotten OR'd every time. And one time the judge, the prosecutor said, we don't think you should let him out this time, Judge. And my lawyer said, hey, he won't do it again. And the judge looked at me and he looked at the prosecutor and he slammed his gavel down and said, detained. And I heard from the gallery, my mom just let out this unbelievable, painful noise. Like it wasn't a scream. It was almost like a howl of agony. And it got to the point where I was just, that was a real knife into me. And it got to the point after a while that I was just sick of knowing that there were so many people in this world sad, and it was all because of me. And I changed my whole circle of friends. I asked for help from everybody. I went to rehab again for the fourth time, but this time it actually took. And then I just kept getting better at making better decisions, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and 14 years clean now, that's quite an achievement. It's a long time, so congratulations.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you. That's the greatest compliment you can give somebody.
Yeah, well, I'm honoured to have made it, I guess. Um, where are we able to check out your book then, if we'd like to have a little flick through the pages?
Well, it's available on Amazon Kindle right now. I signed it, I did self-publishing on it, so I
Oh,
uploaded it myself, and then you can click a box when you do that
ooh,
called Kindle Select, where anybody who has Kindle Unlimited, I guess, can download it for absolutely free. They can flip through the book. You can download a free copy right now. The Kindle Select program lasts for 30 days from its publishing.
yeah.
So after that, it'll be going on to all major platforms. But I thought that this was the best way to kind of get it out there and get it in people's hands right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And just briefly, do you think you'll have even more books on the way after this one?
I've got a couple of interesting stories in my head, but it's, I'll be honest with you, I hate reading. I hate reading. I've never read a novel
Mm,
from cover to cover in my entire life. And
yeah,
when I told my editor, Jessie, about that, she said that is so shocking because she
yeah,
used the word captivating to describe the story. That made me feel so good. But I've actually never read a book, and this was a very a very trying thing to actually sit down and get to writing. I would like to
yeah.
do it again, but I just don't know for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's weird. Do you feel that now you've written your own book, you might be more likely to want to read, or is the desire still non existent?
I really wish I did. I mean, when you talk to people who read books, they have such vivid imaginations and they're
Yeah,
such interesting people. And when I sit down to read a book, I'll be reading and I'll read a page and I'll read a page, and then I'll sit there and I'll go, my mind was over here thinking about something else. Like, but my mind wanders off when I'm reading a
yeah.
book, and I wish I could though, because it sounds like so much fun when people describe how they do it.
You just have to wait until they make a movie of the book you want to read.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only way I know what happens in most books, from The Great Gatsby to
Yeah.
to everything.
Yeah, you can find out what happened in just an hour and a half rather than 3 days.
Exactly. Yeah, it's I got stuff to do over here.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. It's been great to have you here today.
It's been a pleasure being here. You've been awesome, and I really appreciate your time.